Hey! Welcome back to the channel and welcome back to Planet Zoo. This week we had a little bit of a situation where I've pretty much had the worst creative block I've had since starting the channel. There's always been something that I knew I was going to build next, and unfortunately as we went into this week, I just didn't know what I wanted to build. So I spent the first half of the week bouncing around and jumping in different games. You'll see some of those coming to the channel. I've got a good amount of recording done, although not Planet Zoo. And I've also been away this week as well, which has not helped. It's sort of really cut down the amount of time I can hash through my ideas and work out what we're building next. However, I thought a better way to pull myself out of this pothole of non-creativity that I seem to have fallen into, I'd try and replicate something real. And I thought, why not? Let's build something from reference. And what better than the reference photos I took while I was at Chester Zoo? And it is with that in mind that today we're going to rebuild the chimpanzee house at Chester Zoo, which I really liked. It was a good combination of older style zoo enclosures, the inner area being quite old and obviously built in a not quite as ecologically minded time as some of the newer habitats in the zoo. And it also gives me the opportunity to perhaps learn something. So that's where we sort of are starting off. Now, the building itself is made up of two parts. You've got the older backstage area, which we're not going to build today, but we are going to build the building for it. Build the building. And you've got the main chimpanzee viewable indoor area, which is what we're going to start off. And we're going to use the mud column trick for making a perfect sphere, or a perfect circle in our case. And we're going to use that to build ourselves a nice round building. We're using the Indonesian bricks here because I just think they're a little bit better definition than the red brick is in game. Now, when I visited the enclosure, most of the chimpanzees were inside, as it was a pretty miserable and cold day for the middle of May, which is not that uncommon here in the UK. And so most of them were on the inside. And as we move into the enclosure, they have like this water moat that's only probably about 10 centimeters deep. It's mainly there, I think, just to stop the chimpanzees being right up against the glass that separates the viewing area, more so than a deterrent, as in they can cross it, they can walk in it, they can drink from it. But yeah, so we're going to build that out. We're going to do that by making a trench, and then we're going to clad that all in concrete. And in fact, most of the inside of this habitat is going to be concrete based. A lot of it is built with, I guess, functionality in mind. It's a lot easier to clean down. Yes, it's not as natural looking, but that's fine. That's what the outside is for. Now, in my research for the chimpanzee house, I sort of delved into a lot of what was happening with Chester Zoo. And it was actually probably something that might be worth a bit of a video on, or at least a reflection on how we build some of these enclosures. And I have got a few more I want to recreate. And that is that, so the island that we're going to build outside of our chimpanzee house here was actually built or rebuilt in 2021. And this chimpanzee house is in effect way out of line with what is normally classed as a good habitat for chimpanzees. And building it, you can kind of see it's very concrete. There's no natural bits to it. I actually still think they had a pretty good amount of space inside, and it didn't look too bad. And obviously they've got such a big area outside that it was potentially not an issue. However, it does raise a few good questions that when we are building habitats for Planet Zoo, certainly in a more realistic sense, should we be following what is there, or should we be setting a better example by building bigger and more, I guess, holistic habitats for the animals? It's probably a little bit too highbrow for a gaming channel, and certainly is worth some discussion, but it's a thought that popped into my head while I was building it, and it's sort of a case of, well, this could be a lot better, and I could very much build it a lot better in Planet Zoo. And obviously it's just a game and the animals themselves are not suffering from it, but yeah, interesting line of conversation, I think. Moving on back to the video, however, with the main structure now complete, I wanted to build a curved, or I guess domed type roof that goes up to this point. And I tried all of the roof pieces that we have in the game, but they were a little bit too restrictive. So we're going to use these painted bricks to simulate tiles, and we're going to pop some wooden trim on the bottom. And then on the inside, we're going to build the cage, the inner cage, all onto this one piece, so that we then use the mud pillar trick to rotate it round and create our cone of a roof. All of this will already be on there, and all we've got to do is just knock some windows in. And there you can see once we've done that, I'm now going to use that same mud pillar template just to make sure we get that nice and central to the building. And then we've got this circular bit on the top, which we can then lower down the cone roof piece just to finish her off. Now, given that this is just a recreation that we're building in Sandbox here and it's not going into an actual zoo, we can afford the luxury of making sure all of our windows point towards the sun, so we get some nice reflections. You can see it's just testing that out there. And then we're just going to pop a little bit of detail in where the roof meets the building with these wooden posts, just so it looks like they've got something to sit on. And with that, we can move on to building the climbing frame. Now, this was something that I took quite a few photos of because it really sort of caught my eye on how they built it. So the way that they have created this climbing structure inside the indoor habitat is just a couple of metal, I guess the easiest thing of relating it to would be like play school type climbing frames, where it's these giant metal poles with different platforms and different things on them for you to clamber all over and swing from. And it just looked really fun. So I wanted to create something very similar. So we're going to start off trying to keep as much of this climbable as possible. Obviously the metal poles that we're using are not climbable, but we are going to bring some ropes in so that they can traverse back and forth between these platforms. We're trying to keep along that central theme of this desaturated khaki type green colour. So we're also going to bring all of our metalwork, all of our doors, etc. into that sort of colour scheme. Again, pulling that directly from our reference photos. A lot of building this climbing frame was just about having fun with metal beams. So as long as everything's got a good bit of support, we've got beams going everywhere that we need them, everything's nicely held up and looks structural, then it will turn out good. I'm going to pop these pulleys on the top because we're going to connect some steel cables from them to the roof line, just so that we've got a bit more structural support to the top of these poles. Some of these chimpanzees can get quite big and quite dense, and obviously having them swing off of them will mean you need a good bit of grounding to this climbing frame. Next up, we're going to go a little crazy with the ropes. So I'm going to put these pretty much anywhere that I want a chimp to be able to get around on this structure. And some of these look a little bit off, but that's because I know that if I don't put them in, the chimpanzees will just never go there. We're going to also use the Oceania nets. Now, whilst these are not climbable items, which is a big hit and miss from Frontier, they do count as a flat surface. So they can, if you put them horizontal, work as a hammock, and they will in fact go on them. Finally, just to finish off some of the activities in here, we're going to drop some ropes down from the ceiling. Again, the monkeys are not going to swing on these, but we've got them dropping down so they can at least climb up them, and hopefully we'll see some of that in the cinematics. Finishing up now, we're just going to pop a load of straw everywhere, as well as a couple of straw decals on the floor, just because it's going to be a little bit messy. Now, as we move outside, it's time to move on to the much more natural area of the habitat. And I started off just by drawing out a rough area that we're going to have our chimpanzee island in. Once I'd got that fairly rooted into the size I'd like it, I went back over the land that was left and just brought in a couple of hills, a little bit of deviations, make it nice and lumpy and bumpy. My experience of this island was it was very lush, very full of vegetation. And one of the important bits that really stuck with me was that you really had to walk all the way round the outside of this lake to see everything. You couldn't see anything from just one standpoint, and even the chimpanzees' climbing apparatus was mostly hidden, so that you had to kind of catch them at the right angle, which felt a lot more special when you did. It sort of amplified that experience. We want to try and get that feeling with this habitat. Now, for the climbing element, I want this to be nice and high. I want it almost at tree line. So we're going to build these giant poles right up out the ground, and then I literally just went crazy. I stopped following the reference photo for this bit because it was very hard to find reference photos for every part of their climbing apparatus. So instead, we're just going to go and pop down some ropes, beams and bridges into all of the areas that I think looks right. And I spent a bit of time with this. It was more about just getting it all linked up, making sure there's more than one path to a destination. And as you'll see in the final cinematics, this is, not to spoil anything for anyone, this is probably one of the few habitats I've made where I filmed like twice as much cinematic evidence than has gone into the final video. And that's because every time I put the camera down, they would do an animation or they would do something that just sort of caught my eye, and I thought, oh, I've got to record that. And it's been brilliant. I really love how they interact with all of this, and it worked better than I could ever imagine. So stick around to the end and you'll see what I mean with that. Now we're going to bring a little bit of those hammocks out to the outside as well, just so they've got some platforms up there to play about on. And then we're going to move on to planting. Now this is the first time I've ever used these dead trees from the Twilight Pack. Normally I just think they're really, really ugly, and I thought, well, we'll give it a go. I was looking for some fallen logs or like some dead trees that have just been dropped down. We've got a couple of the cherry trees there and they're okay, but I wanted something a little bit more dry, and these actually not too bad. I think I will probably use them again. I didn't want to just go down and use the birch, which tends to be the sort of fallback tree outside of the cherry blossom there. However, I think these kind of work a little bit better for the more muted tones that we're using with this whole habitat. Then in comes these creosote bushes again, just to give us some hedges. Again, the reference photos and what I saw was there's a lot of thick green hedges, basically creating little roots around the island. And we're going to use the creosote bushes for that because I think they just look the absolute best when it comes to hedges. Outside of that, there's a lot of deciduous trees and some coniferous trees. So quite a lot of pines, quite a lot of different, I guess, more sparser vegetation, but also vegetation that is going to survive being climbed in and ripped apart and just destroyed by the chimps. Newfound love for these bedalias as well. The leaf parts of these make great weeds, and I thought they work really well as again a very desaturated colour. And although you won't see it on the video here, I also used a lot of the sage bushes, as you can probably see in the background, to make these big spiky bushes which really look quite well. As you can see here, as we go round, I'm trying to make it so that every single view has something different to look at, and I think we achieved that quite well. On to that final stretch now, a couple of little details. So first off, we're going to use the stalactites here to make a nice concrete edged exit from the main building. The way this has been done in reality is actually a dusty concrete area. However, I didn't really want to keep bringing those concrete panels out of the indoor. So instead we've used sand, and I'm just going to edge it up with these to make it look like it's been shored up by a unnatural rock, rather than just putting a load of stone everywhere. I did go back, however, throughout the habitat and pop down some more natural stone croppings, both on the edge of the waterline as well as some little decorative rocks. And then with those done, we're going to move on to the safety aspects in the outer perimeter fence. So we're starting off with a more traditional wall, a cobblestone wall. I'm going to use the rustic stone for that. I'm not a big fan of the rustic stone. I find it a little bit too flat. I think it's a little bit too rectangular. But I think by the time we've got all the other elements into this, it doesn't look too bad. So our first line of defense is essentially a leg height cobblestone wall going all the way around the lake. And this is just there, I guess, for appearance. For a more solid safety purpose, we're going to make a nice angled metal barrier that will sit on the inside of the habitat. And this is for two reasons. The angled bit stops people throwing rubbish and kids into the lake. But equally, on the other side, if any of the chimps get a little bit ambitious, they won't be able to climb out from that side. Now, chimps and water don't go well. This is kind of a well-known thing. They don't know how to swim. However, while I was looking at some research for a separate project, there's an interesting story about a zoo in Denmark who had a wonderful troop of both central and western chimpanzees who, the first time they got introduced to their big outdoor habitat, the alpha male of the group decided to go jumping into the water. And whilst they managed to get him out, they put a giant stick for him to grab a hold and climb out. He climbed out onto the visitor side. Now, luckily in that story, the male chimp, after drying himself off and stopping his panicking, just jumped straight into the arms of the keeper and was quite tame and sort of allowed her to carry him back to the enclosure. However, these barriers are equally important for that very reason, that you don't want chimps getting onto the visitor side. Now, while I was rabbiting on there, you probably saw me putting down that third line of defense, which is a much more sturdier, newer wooden fence. And off camera, we're going to go back and just fill that area with planting, and you'll see that in the final cinematics. Now, to finish off the building, we're going to build ourselves a little exit gate, and we're going to use the same resources we've used in all of our previous episodes, where we use the metal beam for the surrounding and then the aluminium door, which would essentially be remote operated. We're going to bring the heater in as our control panel, and as always, we're going to run our electrical cable round to our backstage. Then as that finishes up, we're going to jump on to possibly some of the best cinematics I've taken in a long while, and I'm so happy with how this habitat has turned out. It's really come together better than I imagined, especially considering I came from the viewpoint of someone with complete creative block. As you can see, different viewpoints, different angles, the chimpanzee animation. Now, as I mentioned earlier in the video, I have never built for chimpanzees, and in fact, I've not really built for any of the larger apes in the game. So the orangutan, the gorilla, all of those, I've got such ideas, especially for the orangutan, following Chester's monsoon habitat, which I thought was just wonderful and would be quite a entertaining creation to rebuild in Planet Zoo. But I'm just so happy with how it turned out. It's really invigorated me to try and keep going with a couple of recreations, but also bring some of those ideas into our more fantasy zoos. Now, in amongst my rambling there, I completely forgot midway through the video to point out that if you enjoyed the video today, to tick the like button. So if you haven't done so already, please do so right now. Really helps the channel out and lets more people see our wonderful videos. And on top of that, if you're not currently subscribed, don't forget to tick the subscribe button while you're down there. There'll be far more Planet Zoo and more content coming. I can't wait for you to join us on our journey as we jump back into season 2 of Wildlands coming fairly soon. Let me know what you think in the comments section down below. I've really enjoyed this habitat. I hope you have too, and I will see you next time. Bye guys.